Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's very special live session, Software Quality in the Service of Innovation in the Insurance Industry, the branch insurance use case. Since we have three distinguished guests today, I want to take a moment to intro them to you. Co-founder and CTO at Branch Insurance, Joe Emison, puts us all to shame with his resume. Prior to co-founding Branch, Joe founded BuildFax, which was acquired by DMGT. He founded Spaceful, which was acquired by Xceligent. He founded Blueprints, which was acquired by Harris Computer, and FPod, which was acquired by Win Solutions. And to top this all off, if this wasn't enough, Joe also graduated with degrees in English and mathematics from Williams College and has a law degree from Yale Law School. And on a personal note, I will tell you that I heard him give this talk during the dry run, and it is brilliant. So you're in for a real treat. Joining Joe today are Erik Fogg, co-founder and CRO at ProdPerfect, and Dan Levy, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Applitools. So without any further ado, I will turn this now over to Erik.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. I'm Erik, and Adi, thanks so much for the warm intro to us. We're going to be starting off with Joe telling us about how he has set up his infrastructure and development and testing process to be able to support a lean team, making fast progress and innovating rapidly over at Branch. And then Dan and I are going to be talking about how our tools support Joe's testing infrastructure in the second half. So Joe, take us away. Tell us about Branch.
Thanks, Erik. So Branch is a new insurance company that is really focused on selling home and auto insurance to people who buy both home and auto insurance. And this is, there are a lot of people who own homes and own cars. 78% of people who own homes bundle their auto insurance, and there's no good way to do it today. Essentially, everybody, you're going to spend 2 hours, you're going to talk on the phone, and you're going to spend so much time and effort that you're just going to buy whatever's offered to you because it was such a pain in the butt to get the price. And so what Branch has done is we have changed the insurance products themselves, changed the way that you buy insurance, changed the way we use data in insurance, in all of these different from any incumbent and any startup, such that for most people, if you go to ourbranch.com and you put in your name and your address, like what you see on the screen here, you will get a real price that you can buy immediately for insurance, for home and auto as a bundle, or just the home or just the auto. So, again, to reiterate, if you go anywhere else, they might give you a price, probably not after name and address, maybe after a couple of things, but you can't actually buy that price. There's still lots more questions and lots more data for that insurer to pull before they can actually give you that real price. So there's this huge impact that Branch is having on the insurance space based upon this magical ability that we have. All right. Now, I think it's worth noting this is complex, right? So in order to do this, if you want to hit the next slide, in order to be successful at changing the way everyone has bought home and auto insurance for decades, and changing the way you bring data into that, and changing the way that you think about the purchase process, especially, again, at Branch, we will sell you home and auto at the same time. Everyone else will sell you one and then sell you the other one because their systems aren't set up the right way, right? The products aren't actually built that way. In order to do this, we have to use a lot of insurance expertise to change insurance products. And we have to use a lot of technical expertise in how to design systems so that we can return back data to you. We have to build all of these systems ourselves. Everything that we have built at Branch in order to sell you insurance, we had to build because everything that exists off the shelf or even as a customizable product in insurance, 100% of those sell you one policy and then another policy. All right. We also had to completely change the way you license and use data. We're the only insurer that goes and pulls data at the beginning. You give us name and address, we go pull all the data. Nobody else does that. They all put it at the back of their process because it's expensive, because it's painful, because they don't know how to make it fast. All right. So in order to build what we have built at Branch, we have had to use this insurance expertise, this data expertise, and a technological building expertise to put forth what you have at ourbranch.com today. Okay, and if you want to hit the next slide, let's look at the architecture that Branch uses. Branch is completely serverless. This means we don't worry about any virtual machines, any containers, any servers. There is not one. And again, we are a full stack insurance company. We do everything. Serverless as a methodology for building enables us to focus on the things that we need to focus on, right? So again, we have to have all these other expertises in order to get done what we need to get done. We don't need to layer on Kubernetes expertise or, network engineering expertise. Those things would detract from the amount of focus we can put on what really matters to our customers, which is delivering that home and auto price that is cheaper and faster to them. Okay. So within our architecture, then what do we have? So we run our backend, our Lambda functions. And so you can see on this diagram, you may have heard of AWS Lambda. It's a way that you can write code and you send it to Amazon and they worry about running it. They worry about scaling it. You just send them the code, they run it for you. All right. Now, Lambda on its own is not a self-contained way to run backend code. You've got authentication. You worry about all sorts of exploits you could have. That would all of the different ways you could get hacked. And so Amazon also provides this fantastic service called AppSync, and you can see that sitting there in the middle. We've actually got two of them. We've got one AppSync instance that runs for all of our customers, our clients and potential clients, and one that runs for our internal staff to make changes. All right. Here's what AppSync is. It's a GraphQL API that manages all of the inputs. It sends all of it to the Lambda functions. They all go straight back through the GraphQL API to all the clients talking to them. And it does authentication. So it hooks in with Amazon Cognito. And it does validation. And so you just can't sort of fuzz or buffer overrun or do any of the things that like a web application firewall is in place to stop. You don't have to worry about those things. AppSync makes sure that what comes through, it gets rejected if it's bad. What comes through is clean and is exactly the event object that the Lambda expects. And then on the front end, we have React and React Native applications. So this architecture allows us to, we focus on front end. About 80% of the software development time that we spend is on the front end, building React, React Native. We spend some time on the back end, right? And this entire thing, all of this exists in one monorepo, so a single code repository that also has the infrastructure as code information. So this is like a CloudFormation YAML. All of that lives in one repository. You check it out and you deploy it, and then boom, there's full insurance company built for you, ready to go, scales automatically. Another thing to point out, and a tip that I would have for you, if you are able to go serverless, is every single developer and every single environment has his or her own unique Amazon account. So we have, in the neighborhood of 40 Amazon accounts now that are each running a different environment, all right? Now, here's the amazing thing about this infrastructure. We don't pay a lot to Amazon. So I don't know what your Amazon bill is, but our Amazon bill last month was $734.38. This is the complete set. This is across all 40 Amazon accounts that we have. And this is because, there's some latent payment we have for storage. You can see an S3 there, but essentially everything else we pay for is just use on demand. So every time you go to ourbranch.com, you put in your name and address, we're invoking a Lambda. And if you go look at how cheap it is to run one Lambda invocation, you can see that there. We're using all these other serverless services. You can see that, our biggest spend here is on DynamoDB. We do a ton. We're reading and writing constantly to Dynamo. It's a fantastic serverless database. So here, this is how we do things, but there's something really important that I've learned over running engineering organizations now for more than 20 years. And that is that you have two paths you can go on as an organization, okay? The path that most organizations are on is one where it takes a while to get software development done. And so in this path, when a business stakeholder comes to the development department, right, comes to software engineering and says, I need you to build X. There are two paths you could go on this. One is you could say, hey, could we build, just like a little bit, tiny bit of it, and then like put it out and watch what happens and iterate on it? But if your organization is kind of slow at getting things out, well, then the stakeholders know, well, if I wait for you to put a little bit out, it might be a month or two or a year before I can ever get anything changed on it. So I'm not going to let you do that. I'm going to make you build something kind of big, right, and significant. And so we're going to have to spend a lot of time specifying, or we're going to spend a lot of time designing it, or you're going to spend a lot of time building it. It's going to spend a lot of time in QA and acceptance, right? And all of this makes everything much slower, right? And this is, I tend to think of this as existing in the Scrum world where everybody does 2-week sprints, right? And there's like 2 or 3 days of manual QA on the end to get it live, right? That's a terrible world to be in my view. You can't go quickly. The much better world to be in is when the stakeholder comes to you and says, I want to build this big thing. And you say, hey, why don't I build this small thing, right? And then why don't we watch what happens? And then we can make changes. And the business stakeholder says, you release very quickly. I know there are multiple releases you do every week. I know that if you do this, I'm going to be able to get my revisions on this done very quickly. And so they say, yes, you can do that. And in that world, you can do this constant, quick build all the time. And you're happy, and it's wonderful, and you miss this problem, right? You at least mitigate this problem that we all have in the software industry, that we're all bad at specifying large features. We're all really bad at knowing how customers or clients are going to interact with things, and we have like a greater than 50% failure rate on we built something and we expected it to work this way and it doesn't, right? More than 50% of the time, large features, that's what happens, right? And so if you can build them iteratively, if you can build them in tiny chunks, you can make those changes. You have easier acceptance, right? You have all of this stuff is a lot simpler, right? But you can only do that if you can constantly release, if you can give reassurance to your business stakeholders that you're actually going to get things out quickly for them so they can go watch it and they can move with you, all right? But there's a really important part of being able to do this frequent release, and that is testing. And so the magic of automated tests is that you work as a developer, you take your ticket, your specifications, you work on them locally in your environment, and you say, okay, I think it's ready. Let's merge this in with the rest of the code. And the magic of automated tests is when the automated tests find the bug that you're about to introduce, right? Find the way you're about to break the build. They find it before the merge. That's the magic of automated tests, right? But what's the reality of automated tests in most places today? Well, the reality is 25% of your developer's time is going to be spent making automated tests. And if you live in a world like we do, where we're constantly making changes, right? We're making this small change, we're making another small change, another small change, you're going to be breaking your tests all the time. That's what you do. And so in this world, you are going to carve off a huge chunk of your potential velocity. Again, it's trying to get these things out so the business stakeholders are allowing you to build small chunks, right? You're going to take a whole bunch of their time, a full quarter of their time in my experience, and they're going to be writing and updating tests on it. And that's a huge waste, right? I think this was what we had to do several years ago. This was the reality of it. But where Branch sits today and what is possible today is very different with ProdPerfect and Applitools. And so what we do today is every time anybody opens a PR or updates a PR, we run the ProdPerfect test suite against it. It's run automatically by Circle CI, and that comes back to the developer. And then every time after we merge to trunk, but we don't automatically deploy to prod, after merges to trunk, we run Applitools. And we run what it is. So let me tell you how these things work and how I think about them. So ProdPerfect is providing feature integration smoke tests for us. What they have done for us is analyze all of the routes, and they regularly update this. They analyze all of the routes that people take through our web application. So they're the tracker. It's a lot like, we send events to segment.com to handle various things. They're just like sort of grabbing those events that are happening off the page. They then can build a graph. They can define tests, and then they write the test, and then they update the test. So when we break the tests, right, sometimes the tests fail because we made an error, but sometimes the tests fail because we made a change. And then we go tell ProdPerfect, we say, hey, update the test because we changed how it works. And ProdPerfect says, great, we're on it. And then the tests get updated. And then I don't have to spend that quarter of my developer's time updating tests because ProdPerfect is doing it. ProdPerfect is worrying about coverage of those tests for me and is doing all those updates for me. But ProdPerfect isn't a complete solution in and of itself because it can't help me with visual changes and it can't help me with cross-browser testing. And so we found Applitools, and we use Applitools for both of these things. And we hook them in pre-production deploy so that we know what we're deploying to production works in multiple browsers and doesn't have visual errors. And if we find them, a great thing about errors found visually for us is it's very easy to track them back to the developer. Errors that are created, however, in like a smoker integration test are much harder to track back. That's why we run those pre-merge, because it catches those things ahead of merge. The way I think about Applitools is in the past, I've used Sauce Labs and Browser Stack, and Applitools is like version 5 of those services. Those required so much more work for us to do internally. And ProdPerfect is in a similar way. Prior to ProdPerfect, we were writing our own tests in Cypress, right? And we were trying to update them. And I've used packages that purport to let you update them or write them, and none of them worked well, right? It still required an immense amount of internal time. And so with both of these being able to run, this lets us deploy much more frequently, right? I have high confidence that with all these tests passing in trunk, I can deploy that and that is going to work correctly. I don't have to spend 2 days of manual QA. I don't have to worry about these things. And I also am not in this situation where I have to think, oh, well, we haven't had time to update the test. So we're going to go in, in a manual QA mode for a little while. I don't have to do that either, right? So these are enormous enablers for us to be able to get that deployment, that frequent deployment, which then allows us to do software development the right and agile way. That's how we do it at Branch.
So this is Erik over here at ProdPerfect, and Joe was actually the first person on earth to approach us while we started working together, and he said, hey, I want to add this visual and cross-browser layer to what ProdPerfect is doing. And look, you guys are already discovering what to test and writing tests. Can you just plug into Applitools and make it work so that I don't have to go rewrite all these darn tests in Applitools as well? And we said, well, maybe. So we called up Applitools and did some engineering. We figured it out. And today, Joe has Applitools and ProdPerfect running without him having to build or update either the ProdPerfect tests or the Applitools tests. And so we'll talk at the end of this about how the integration works. I'm going to start by talking very briefly about how ProdPerfect works. Dan's going to talk briefly about how Applitools works. And then we're going to talk about how they work together. There we go. So the reason ProdPerfect came into being was obviously there's a lot of, if you look at the typical QA cycle for test automation, right? What do? We build requirements, turn those, or we understand requirements, you turn those into plain English test cases, right? So Excel sheets with, click this, fill in that. You guys have all seen them, and then crank out code, build by build, maintain it, and then over time, update the test suite based on how the requirements have changed. And there's tons of tools that are entering the market. We hear about them, probably 2 come out of Y Combinator every class that are trying to make the maintenance part of test automation easier, because this is where people see and feel all the pain. But what all these tools were missing was that the core problem, the core challenge for test automation comes at the very beginning, which is understanding what to test, what's important to test, especially if you want to move fast, right? Joe's deploying Joe's team are trying to merge features, small features, dozens and dozens of times per week. They're deploying to prod many times per week, right? And so if you take every single requirement and try to turn it into a test, you're going to have 1,000 tests that'll take days to run, and you can't support continuous development and continuous deployment. So of course, people know that they have to prioritize, right? They have to pick what they're going to test and what they're not going to test. But the problem with that is if you take two different QA automation teams, right? Two sets of smart people, experienced engineers, and you say, take a look at these requirements and tell me what are the priority 1 tests? What should I be running with every merge? They're going to come up with different answers. As Joe mentioned, engineers don't actually have a great sense of how users use the application. This is well known in the world of user experience, right? We who build the application aren't the user. We understand the product too well to know what the user is doing. And so we're actually at a disadvantage, whether we're a UX team or a QA team, we're at a disadvantage in trying to understand what is most important to our user. What should we make sure is tested every time to make sure that it doesn't break? But there's good news, right? As Joe mentioned, we're taking these segment events, so clicks, form submissions, page views from the application, ingesting them and analyzing them to understand how people are using the application. Our customers are constantly telling us exactly how they're using the application. They're telling us what's important to them so that we can prioritize what matters to the user and test that, as opposed to build and maintain tons of tests that have very low marginal value, that add to runtime, add to maintenance time, and add to instability. And that's where ProdPerfect decided to focus, rather than in just being, another test runner that's meant to make maintenance a little bit easier. So the way that Joe works with us is, he plugged in our data tracker to prod, so we collect those events, we analyze them to understand patterns of behavior from the users and prioritize what we're going to test. We use Mechanical Turk to add mock data in the test environment. So we build these tests into his test environment, and that mock data is stable there. So we're able to crank out end-to-end test code that Joe runs in CI. As he mentioned, when tests break, we go fix them. Right now, we're throwing engineers at this problem. There's a big machine learning kind of lift to be able to predictively fix these, which we're working on through all of our, but we're building the data sets for right now through all the work that we do. But the real magic of ProdPerfect is that over time, user behavior changes. Joe's team is releasing dozens of features per week or altering dozens per week. And so the test suite has to change to keep up. Over time, we're going to see drift between the old way that users use the application and the new. What typically happens for a regular QA team is that they just add new tests, and their test suite grows and grows and grows and grows. It becomes bloated, it becomes unstable, it loses relevancy. What ProdPerfect is doing is comparing what is the test suite covering and what are the behaviors that matter most to users. Where there's any divergence, we close the gap by updating a test or adding a new test, or sometimes even retiring old tests in order to keep the test suite lean, mean, and highly relevant. And so the way Joe plugged us in was, we're just a magic black box, right? So we're collecting clickstream data from the front, we're outputting test code that he runs in CI. His developers get those results immediately. Our test suite runs at about 16 minutes, so that every time they merge, one of Joe's developers goes and gets coffee, comes back, and after they've had a sip or two, they get the ProdPerfect results, and if they've shipped a bug, they know about it immediately. We don't have to chase down the bug 2 weeks later. We don't have to find who wrote it. We don't have to remember what we tried to write, right? We just know, we know immediately and precisely what bug did I introduce and where, so that bug fixing can happen in situ at the moment and bugs don't make it to the master branch. Real quickly on our methodology, the way that we look at this map, so our analysis engine is doing all this work every hour on Joe's application behind the scenes. is we take this map of events. So each dot is an event, click page, page view, form submission. Bigger dots are more common. And these arrows are people traversing between them, right? So this is a map of behavior. And what we do is we normalize the data. So we take out, URL slugs and other data that specifies to, oh, I'm a specific customer, specific branch member. And after normalizing, we aggregate down the pathways that we're tracing through. So aggregation is like drawing a best fit curve, because people use the application slightly different ways. They hit back, they hit refresh, they go the wrong way sometimes. And so by drawing that best fit curve, we understand what is the core pathway that matters most to these users. And now we have a pathway to follow through the application. After we've done that once, we do it over and over again until we reach this long tail, right? There's this long tail of edgy behavior that we don't want to test because it's not important to users. So we actually leave that alone and intentionally don't build tests for it so that we can support Joe's continuous development process. Joe's team sees, when the ProdPerfect test suite runs, if there's a bug, what they can do is they can view in the web portal, which is linked from CI, the failure run along with the last time it passed, so that they can see very tightly what's changed about the application, so that if, for example, it was an intentional change and not a bug, they can know, okay, ProdPerfect just needs to update the tests, and they can determine that quickly rather than have to spend a few hours trying to chase it down. The way that we get set up is after Joe plugs us in, this integration step, to launch with a new customer, we collect data for 2 weeks, we analyze it, generate the test suite, and then there's this buffer time for us to stabilize the test suite as we learn more about the application in that ramp up. So anyone joining us, they plug us in 6 weeks later, they have a test suite ready to go that they can start running in CI as part of the process. So compare this, of course, to you hire a QA engineer for the first time. How many months is it going to take for them to ramp up to be fully loaded? Typically, we see something like 6 to 9 months before a full test suite is ready. We'll be ready in 6 weeks. So it's during this, during this time in here, after you plug us in and before you get your test suite, that our factory is busy making the candy and getting it ready for you. So Joe plugged us in, got us running, and when he knew that he needed to expand the power of the test suite that he had, he called up Applitools, made sure that Applitools and ProdPerfect could work together, and then Applitools got to work making the test suite even better. I'm going to turn it over to Daniel right now.
All right, and I'll go ahead and share my screen too, and hopefully that looks okay. This is it's I know we did the dry run and I've heard this all once, but I mean, this really is the future of testing, the combination of ProdPerfect and Applitools that Joe's embraced to reclaim that 25% of his time, of his developers' time, so that they can be more agile and develop this app in a continuous manner. And it's so cool to see. So I'll tell you a little bit about Applitools. We are the next generation of test automation through visual AI. And what we're hearing out in the field is a lot of the types of things that you're hearing from Joe, that you're hearing from Erik, is that today's approach to test automation is broken. And we hear that it's broken for a number of reasons. And many people like Joe are hearing this. They're experiencing some or all of these reasons. And this is across industries, from finance to pharma to technology and more. Test code is complicated and time-consuming to write in a way that ensures quality. And in a recent study that we did, we showed that on average, it took over an hour to write a test, but it took 2 hours to write a thorough test, right? You can write a test that's not going to give you coverage. It's kind of writing a test for the sake of writing a test, which is what Erik was just talking about. You don't want to do that. You want to write smart tests. So it takes even longer to do that. So it could easily take 6 to 8 months to write a suite of, say, 500 tests. And that doesn't factor in maintenance. This is the real killer. Locators are how an automation framework finds elements in the browser to interact with and validate. And when a UI changes, locators often break, causing a test to fail. And since UIs are always changing, tests are always breaking, and this takes time for engineers to fix and rerun. And that was that 25% of time that Joe had allocated for creating and maintaining tests. This is known as test maintenance, and it can consume a massive amount of time. Actually, I'm not even so sure 25% of the time is all that bad compared to what we see out there in the industry. As your test suite grows, more tests are added, and there are more screens, and therefore there are more locators in use. And this only amplifies the flakiness of the test suite. So we need to, this flakiness now gets kind of a 20 to 30 time multiplier when you start running these tests across various browsers and viewports, cross-browser testing. And that again gets to some of the pain that Joe referenced in some of the traditional cross-browser testing approaches that he's tried in the past. Because you've got the flakiness and the brittleness of your existing test cases combined with the flakiness of spinning up a VM and needing that constant connection to run those tests. And it can really slow down your build process and really cripple you. So meanwhile, no matter what you're doing with what you're experiencing, all this pain and bugs are still escaping into production. And the example that we're showing here is with Southwest Airlines, and you can see this is a bug that would escape. A typical functional test is not going to detect that this is a bug. So if you see it, you think, okay, well, this bug is indeed visual in nature, but it's really functional in nature because it's preventing someone, either I can't click on that because there's an element laid on top of it, or I just lost confidence in this website because I'm not going to buy from a website that has their continue button with text overlaid on it. You lose confidence and you say, you know what, I don't want to give them my credit card. But in reality, a typical functional automation tool is going to say, okay, I'm on this page, verify that this element in the DOM exists, verify that this button exists. Okay, does continue exist? Yes, it exists. Go ahead and click it. Now you click it and you're on the next page and it has no idea that there's a problem. Everything passes. And the great, Applitools helps with this. We replicate the human eye and brain to look at every screen and page in seconds and stop regression. So what you just saw was a kind of a combination. It was a visual, we're running visual AI and visual validation, but we are able to form some level of functional testing because a lot of functional defects actually represent themselves within the UI. And for that reason, Applitools can detect both visual and functional defects across web, mobile. We actually are used across IoT and tvOS and a number of different interfaces. Basically, if we can capture an image of it, and we have SDKs for over 50 different testing frameworks, then we can test it. We're used for compliance testing, localization testing, and more. So how do we do it? The magic in the Applitools platform is its heart, which is the visual AI. This is the industry's only AI-powered deep learning computer vision that replicates human eye and brain. And through visual AI comes incredible efficiency, allowing tests to be created faster and with fewer locators, and ultimately be more reliable with less maintenance required. I touched on the fact that we work with over 50 SDKs, so we're not a rip and replace solution. We work with things like Test Cafe, which ProdPerfect leverages Test Cafe, as well as other frameworks like Selenium and Cypress and so on. And it's this integration with ProdPerfect, by the way, is really such a nice harmony between visual AI and the machine learning that they're doing is incredible. Because I've talked about this in other webinars where sometimes testing happens for the sake of testing. Oh, we add more tests, we add more tests, we add more code. And what they're doing is taking a smart approach to it. And we combine their smart approach with minimizing the number of tests, but giving you broad coverage based on the use cases that are actually happening within your app, combined with the power of visual AI, you really are getting a substantial, smart next generation of testing. When you take our visual AI and combine it with the ultrafast grid, tests are now executed in seconds versus minutes across browser, devices, and all viewports. And this is something that Joe's been leveraging heavily over at Branch Financial and Branch Insurance. This streamlines your CI and CD process, right? It delights developers and teams and ensures perfection against all browser screens and viewports. So some of the efficiencies that we see from visual AI, this is based on a study that we did back in, I think, the January-February timeframe, is that tests can actually be authored 5.8 times faster. They're 3.8 times more stable due to the reduction in locators and labels in leveraging our concept of an open-ended assertion. And then we're actually catching more defects with 45% more defects caught versus traditional testing. And I touched on a few of our use cases already, but you can see here use cases from the traditional kind of visual and functional regression testing to things like compliance and document validation. We're able to scan PDFs. A lot of pharma companies have black box warnings that they need to ensure on their product pages. A lot of them work with like their legal teams, and they need to see at any point in time, what did our website look like, or what did our application say to an end user, so that we can go back and make sure that we're not leaving ourselves open for lawsuit. And you can see in this example, PS4 is actually using us. This is near and dear to my heart. They're using us to test localization and support for 53 different locales in up to 100 different languages across. I think the PS4 application is actually something like, it's like 50 to 60 different applications kind of in one in that interface, and they're using us to test that, which is really neat. But anyway, I'm going to hand it back to Erik to talk a bit more about Applitools and ProdPerfect together. I think you muted.
Thanks. One of the things that Joe mentioned that I thought was really important was that one of the things that makes Joe's team so powerful is not investing in developing expertise in places that aren't part of Branch Insurance's core competency, right? Branch's core competency is in developing great insurance products based on highly complex, like brand new innovative analysis of all sorts of different factors to be able to give customers instant price, right? That they can buy right there. That's totally new, totally different, and it's really hard. And so Joe said, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel by, in building my server architecture, in building my DevOps process, in building my testing. And that's the thing I think that I'm most delighted to be able to support Joe's team on, is in helping his team stay laser focused on what they're great at. And by working with the two of us together, what Joe's getting is, one product in ProdPerfect that discovers what's important to test and builds the baseline functional tests for him, keeps those updated. And then, again, it was Joe's idea to layer on Applitools and say, what if we took these tests that ProdPerfect built, made them visual, added a new layer of functionality testing, and added cross-browser testing to it? Could I get away with not doing, anything to build and maintain my tests at all, but still get great testing? Plus, the answer is yes. Applitools and ProdPerfect had to do a bunch of work in the background to make our integration work ongoing, but for for a customer now, because Applitools had already built Test Cafe SDK, it's an easy integration. So it's something that we'd coach you through if you decided to work with us. It's an npm command that gets everything linked up, and Applitools and ProdPerfect are able to take care of the rest of the integration to get it moving for you. And for Joe, we found a couple cool bugs that we want to share. In particular, these bugs, what's actually really great about them is that they, they're instances where Joe's team was able to move fast and know that they're covered. So here we have a landing page where someone said, get my price, right? But even though their location was right, they got a let's talk rather than a hey, punch this stuff in and get your price, right? So that's a potential lost customer. And then in this other example, I will, excuse me, which I will figure out here in a minute. There we go. In this other example, Joe's staff would have been unable to find some customers. So we're going to see this bug replicated where the staff team is, they're able to see offers, but they're not able to load customers from the database. So this, of course, would have interrupted operations had it gone to prod. But it's no big deal that developers are, generating these bugs in their initial merge, because they know that they're going to be getting quick feedback about the bug and that they're able to go fix it quickly, right? So these bugs become kind of no big deal. They become a part of the development process and the review process, and getting the testing from ProdPerfect and Applitools becomes part of the development and review process to make sure that quality code is getting out at high speed. We've got, in addition, this great example that Applitools found recently, where if we look up here, this GIF is going back and forth between an old version and a new version in the application. And of course, this looks like it's something small, but of course, with this button moved, with the visual part of this button moved, the functionality could always be interrupted. So it might be harder for someone to actually make a call and get a quote, right? Or excuse me, not a quote. Branch does not do quotes. But get a price, right? And so anything that threatens either the purchasing experience for the customer or the ability for the staff to serve the customer is something that between ProdPerfect and Applitools we're able to catch to make sure that developers are moving quickly without breaking anything. And so ultimately, through Joe's vision and kind of his direction for to put the two of us together and make us go, Joe's team is able to move fast without breaking things and without having to put in all the effort, the costly effort, the time-slowing effort, to make sure that they have their own robust, their own home-built, robust automated testing. By working with the two of us, it's able to move fast and not break things. So we want to take a few minutes for folks to ask questions. If anyone's written any beforehand, Adi will be helping launch those for us. But thanks everyone so far for joining us, and we look forward to what you got for us.
Great. So yeah, we do have some questions. So Erik, first of all, for you, what does ProdPerfect do about workflows that aren't as common? How do those get covered?
Great question. Yeah, and something we get a lot. So whoever asked this probably saw my slide with the graph where there was some green and some red, and we intentionally don't cover what we call this long tail. And there are some ways to selectively cover some of the long tail with ProdPerfect, but by design we actually don't, right? And so sometimes people are uncomfortable with this. They go like, oh gosh, you're only covering a fairly small number of all possible tests, and I'm uncomfortable with this, and I want you to cover more. And we actually say no. And the biggest reason is that our philosophy, very much fits the Google testing pyramid, right? That at the top of that pyramid you have end-to-end tests. They should be small in number and fiercely prioritized. Other areas of the application, most of the functionality, or for your whole application, most of the functionality should also be tested by lower level tests, unit and API tests. And what end-to-end testing does is it makes sure that for a full feature that all of these parts are working together, right? So lower level testing makes sure every individual part works. The end-to-end testing that ProdPerfect and Applitools does make sure that the whole kit works when it's all plugged in. And ultimately, the desire to, from what I've always seen, is the desire to have vast, hundreds or thousands of end-to-end test coverage in an application, I've seen that desire come from one of two things. Either a fear that we don't know what are the right tests to write, right? So we don't know how to prioritize, so we're going to throw everything at the wall, knowing that if we build enough, we'll get the right tests out there in addition to some unnecessary tests. Or I've seen that anxiety come from less robust lower level unit and API testing. But if we have good lower level testing and we have a good process to identify what are the important features for our users, how do they actually use the application, right? Which is new with ProdPerfect. So obviously people, the old anxiety of having to guess and therefore cast a wide net is understandable, but it's no longer necessary.
One quick addition on that is, like, there is a role for what we consider asynchronous manual testing, because like you're going to have edge cases, right? And so we use a variety of different people to go try to break us, right? And try to find edge cases. But we find, for example, that it's best to use someone who really understands insurance, because what we're really worried about is that they're going to like do bad insurance outcomes. So as opposed to just asking people to like bang on things and then get a bunch of error reports that are like things we just don't care about. Like if I do all these dumb things that don't make any sense, like I run into a brick wall. Okay, well, we're not going to prioritize fixing that. But, someone who says, hey, I figured out a way to like buy this coverage by paying less money or something, or like get the policy into a state that we don't think it should go into, that's meaningful on the insurance side, then we do it. So I think the key part about this is that we don't block merges or prod deploys on that. We just constantly worry about having that, baseline run in the background. And then we have ways, when we find problems, we have ways that we go and address, we try to find cases where it might have happened and go fix it. But like the key is it's non-blocking manual QA, and it is edge case. And so you're just not worried about it like doing anything horribly bad across lots of usage.
So we have a question for Dan. So we got this, what is the difference between Applitools and DOM-based testing? And does Applitools replace DOM-based testing?
Sure. Great question. So DOM-based testing is typically looking at the object model. So with a website, it's kind of looking at the generated HTML by the website, and you use DOM-based testing to both navigate by finding locators within the DOM and to validate. So in the example that I was showing earlier with Southwest Airlines, what you need to do to validate that scenario is you would search for a locator to say, does this button exist? And does that exist in the object model? Yes, the button exists. Verify the text of that button. Verify, say, the style of that button. Is the button a certain color? These are things that you could do. You have to write a lot of assertions to do it, one for each attribute, essentially. And that's how you test. That's what DOM-based testing is. Now, visual testing and visual AI-powered testing, it takes an image of the actual application and establishes a baseline of that image of what is correct. And then any variance between that and subsequent screenshots that are captured are now flagged by the visual AI. However, there are variances that are important and variances that are not important. So there were certain things like minor rendering differences between different versions of browsers. For example, if you go from Chrome 82 to Chrome 83, it might render an image slightly different. And if you're using like a pixel by pixel based approach, you're going to get all sorts of false alarms, right? You're spinning cycles and you're wasting time looking at these results and saying, you know what, this is not accurate, this is not a bug, it's just a rendering difference between the browsers. Well, the nice thing about the visual AI is it's replicating the human eye and brain, and it's able to kind of see through those issues. It's like, no, this is a minor rendering issue. This is something that the human eye wouldn't see. This is something that's not important. In addition to that, you've got different types of algorithms that you can specify to use across different regions. So if you have a highly dynamic area within your test, you can specify that as a region, as a layout region, and then the visual AI can actually look at that region and say, you know what, structurally, this looks perfect, but the content is changing, and it ignores that. But it's still testing that page from a layout and structure perspective, which is really powerful. It reduces maintenance and makes testers' lives that much easier. But one is looking at the actual object model or the kind of code behind the website and driving it that way. And the other is a visual manner. Now, can these work together? They do work together all the time. I mean, we rely on test runners that are frameworks like Test Cafe, like Selenium, like Cypress. These drive the browser, and you're still using locators to find elements and drive that browser to the next page, and then call Applitools to grab a screenshot. So these two work in harmony, but it's usually our recommendation to replace a lot of the assertions that you're using from a functional tooling perspective with a single open-ended visual AI-powered assertion, because it reduces the number of brittle locators that are in your code. One other important piece about using visual AI versus pure DOM-based is it allows you access to our ultra-fast grid, which is kind of this new approach to cross-browser testing that Joe's really been taking advantage of. This allows you fast, stable cross-browser testing compared to some of the older traditional flakier approaches that are really prone to errors and false positives.
So we have a question for Joe. How long did it take your team to integrate these two solutions and also be fluent in operating them?
I mean, like, it's basically no time. I mean, you know, you have to sign up and then add the tracker, but you don't. I mean, this was the great thing about ProdPerfect is I was like, I'm really interested, but like usually, you know, it takes us like months to like onboard a new tool that's like really embedded. And they were like, no, add this tracking code. And then it might have been like, I don't know, like they had, I mean, I think, you know, we went back and forth, but I think, you know, the test suite was, I think we saw, you know, it was probably like 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks ish that we had the test suite like ready to run, and we integrated it into CI immediately. So I think like the total amount of time that we spent was probably like an hour or something, and then we had it going. And then with Applitools, it was similar because ProdPerfect and Applitools work together to get it in place. So in order to get these things in place, we have spent almost no time, which is, and then continue to spend almost no time, other than like letting ProdPerfect know, hey, you know, you need to update the test because we broke them, because we changed stuff, or going into Applitools interface, right, and like saying like, you know, there's a new baseline. So that's it.
So the next question that we actually got it for both ProdPerfect and Applitools. And so Erik, you can go first, Dan, you can go second. And per each company, they asked if those solutions support mobile and native application, or are they just for web?
So we're just for web right now. The biggest reason is that the analytics tool space in mobile or it's not just the tool space, but like analytics in mobile and native applications is super clunky, right? One of the great things about web is the HTTP protocol, you know, rationalizes every event into a category. So we can look at that category and go, oh, this is a click. We know what that is. It's actually even like mouse down and mouse up, right? We know what a page view looks like. We know what, you know, we know what a form fill looks like. You know, we get into mobile and you know, how much you swiped and where exactly really matters. You know, it's not clear that there's, you know, it's not the kind of like click a button and fill in a form kind of simplicity, and therefore the kinds of actions that are being passed are much more fractured. Same thing with native, you know, because they're built, you know, kind of all in their own ways. So we're working long-term in a sort of R&D project with a number of kind of open source framework teams to better develop a categorized way of doing even just the analytics, much less the you know, good test running on mobile. It's probably actually a few years out for us. So right now we're just web.
And then from our perspective, we work with web, responsive web, and native mobile. So we have integrations with Appium, all different language frameworks, as well as a few other mobile testing frameworks. So you can implement that way. And then from a cross-browser testing perspective, you can even leverage our ultra-fast grid across responsive web and emulated and simulated mobile devices.
So we're almost out of time, but I want to take one last question. It's for Erik. And it says, we already have our own Selenium tests. Will ProdPerfect integrate with those? And if yes, then how?
Great question. So this is an alpha for us. So not yet, but and to elaborate on the question a little bit, right? Like if you just dump your old testing suite and plug ProdPerfect in, you get a testing suite, right? And but what if you have your own? If you plug ProdPerfect in and get a testing suite, there might be overlap, right, between the tests you wrote and the tests we build. And what we're doing in alpha is using the same analytics that look at how users use the application to look at how you're testing your application, and just follow those same behaviors. So in time, we'll be able to, fairly soon, we'll be able to say, okay, here's what you're testing. We can ignore that, right? And we can go test everything else. Now, we might not want to. We might not, want to ignore it. We might just want to tell you what the overlap looks like so that you can dump your old tests that we're covering now. Either way, so that's, I think, like the critical integration that's not there yet, is just identifying the overlap and being able to eliminate the overlap. The way that most of our customers so we have a number of customers that do have a Selenium test suite or Cypress or whatever, and rather than destroy their old test suite, some of these, they've invested a long time in it. They rather than Joe's team sending manual folks at catching these edge cases, they want to run test automation to look for edge cases. Well, they just kind of do the same thing that Joe does, except with their Selenium suite, right? So they run us frequently on each merge, right? So they're getting immediate feedback. As Joe mentioned, we're kind of like a feature smoke suite, right? So we're getting that immediate feedback from ProdPerfect, and that much larger Selenium test suite runs occasionally. It might run every 2 weeks. And so you have 2 screens of quality assurance that way, rather than just one. So if someone has a much higher standard for quality where you really have to take care of that long tail, right? Like it's healthcare, people could die kind of thing. That's typically how those teams work with us, is they use us rather than their only line of defense for quality assurance. They use us as a way to dramatically accelerate development, and that ends up becoming the core, kind of the core strategic play by integrating us.
Great. So unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. I want to thank everyone that joined us for this live session, and of course, thank our speakers, Joe, Erik, and Daniel. A quick reminder before I let them say their goodbyes, the link to the recording of this session will be emailed to you by end of day Tuesday, and I hope to see you all at our next event. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, it's been a pleasure working with you, Joe and Erik. Yeah, thanks for sharing your story with us, Joe. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and Adi, thank you so much for organizing this. This is great, and thanks for everyone who joined.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.